Happy Friday, welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and I have a lot of books about being a lesbian. I shamelessly stole this idea from my colleague who was talking the other day about doing a TikTok using this sound from this moment in Friends.
Wow, you guys sure have a lot of books about being a lesbian.
So I thought that was inspired, and also that I should hop on that trend, because looking at my shelves I do have a lot of books about women loving women. Whether it be lesbian women, bisexual women, pansexual women, I have just picked up every book that I could recognise on my shelf that I remembered celebrating the love women have for women. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour because I do actually have so many. I could not pick them up for the thumbnail. What you saw on the thumbnail was like half of them. Also, I've probably missed some. If you are zooming in on spines behind me and you can see I've missed some lesbian novels, then let me know. Like Girl, Woman, Other, I couldn't remember if there was any sapphic romance going on in there. I could not remember. Starting with Little Women. In this essay I'm joking. There are no lesbians in this book. It's very disappointing. But if you know where to look, there are in fact lesbians in this book, clearly. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo has a bisexual main character and a wonderful, beautiful love story running throughout between two women. All of that along with her having 7 husbands. Woman was busy. The Confession by Jessie Burton. If you like The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, you should read this one next. It is a very similar kind of format for the story. Again, it has a sapphic romance in it, but this time it's about a famous writer rather than a famous film star. But the plot includes this writer's novel getting adapted into a movie, and so you still get to visit the whole Hollywood scene in here. Shara by Casey McQuiston is a YA novel that is every rom-com that you have ever loved, but make it super, super gay. The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth is another YA novel. This one is super sad. This is about a teenager growing up in a very religious community. Actually, so is Shara. They have that in common. But in this one, she is sent to a conversion camp. So the whole second half of the book takes place at the conversion camp. If you've seen the movie actually only covered the second half of the book. There is a whole first half where we follow her various first loves, and it's a very slow moving book. I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker. You really got to read between the lines to see the lesbians in here. The main character, Cassandra, is gay, and that is something that, because of the time period that she lives in, because of her family situation, is something that she is not comfortable and open with at all. And because of the time that the book was written, it is not explicitly written into the book anywhere, but you will recognise it. I've got 2 very dark books here. We had to remove this post. Finished cover looks like this. This is a translated novella about a girl who works for a social media company. She's in charge of moderating the post, basically, and taking down anything that's offensive. So it's much more about that, but she does have a girlfriend. Nightshift is another very dark book about someone's job making them lose their mind. The main character in this one works a night shift, which severely messes with her, but along the way she becomes completely obsessed with the female co-worker. The Psychology of Time Travel is one of the most fun time travel novels I've ever read. It's got a murder mystery, it's really, really clever, and it's very gay. The Exhibitionist by Charlotte Mendelson, finished cover here. This is about a woman who is married to this terrible man who is an artist, and it's all set in the build-up to this exhibition that he's putting on. Our main character is actually a much better artist, but has never been able to explore her own career properly because of her jealous husband. Throughout this book, she is now having an affair with a woman. Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl, another really fun novel. I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed this one. Our main character in this one, who usually presents as male and is called Paul, is a shapeshifter and can change his body entirely and his gender at will. And so throughout the book at some parts, he becomes poly and is in a lesbian relationship. Concerning My Daughter by Hye-Jin is about a mother whose daughter is gay, and the mother really struggles to come to terms with this, and so they have this very fraught relationship. They all end up living together because the daughter needs to move back home because she runs out of money, and so these 3 women have to live together, and it's about the mother coming to terms with broadening her definitions of love and family. Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fannie Flagg. I really need to reread this book. I have forgotten so much about the rest of the plot in this book. I just remember that I loved it. It was one of those delicious comfort reads. And there is a couple in this, Ruth and Idgie, these 2 women who are, again, while it's never explicitly mentioned, clearly in love and raising a baby together. I Hate Everyone But You by Gabby Dunn and Alison Raskin. Again, I've forgotten a lot of the plot. It's been a long time since I read this one, but I do remember that it's very much based on them, on the writers. It's about these two girls who are best friends and they go off to college, and they are called Ava and Jen, and Ava is like very much based on Alison, Jen is very much based on Gabby. Gabby being bisexual in real life, their counterpart in this book was also bisexual. I cannot remember any particular romantic strands that happened in the book, but I feel like there probably was one. I've got 2 Emma Donoghue books here. Frog Music, which is set in San Francisco in 1876 in a heatwave. Tell me about it. It's based on a real story. It's about the murder of a woman called Jenny Bonnet, who was a cross-dresser. And in this book, there is a bit of a romance between Jenny and our main character, Blanche. The Pull of the Stars is set in Dublin in 1918. It's set during the Great Flu, and it's on a maternity ward in a hospital, and there is a romance that blossoms between 2 women who work there. I probably phrased that badly, because a romance that blossoms sounds like it's going to be a happy gay story, and I feel like I should warn you that it isn't. Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead is a book that I absolutely adored. It is a great sweeping story, roughly in the same kind of format as The Confession and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and again it's about like various retellings of these famous figures, like fictional famous figures, having books written about them, having movies made about them, and I didn't even know that there was going to be a lesbian plot. It developed in the second half of the book and caught me by happy surprise. Patsy by Nicole Dennis-Benn is an absolutely heart-wrenching book that I loved. It's about a woman who abandons her own daughter in order to leave Jamaica behind and go to New York and search for the woman that she once loved. And it's this incredibly difficult decision with horrible, long, far-reaching consequences. And we follow both of these characters, the mother and the daughter, over the next more than a decade, spanning everything that happens to them from then. It broke me a little bit. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters is a book that complicates everything I thought I knew about gender, and I absolutely loved this book. One of our main characters is a trans woman called Reese, and we get through flashbacks the story of her relationship with her ex, who was at the time of their relationship a trans woman called Amy, but has since detransitioned and is living as a cis man called Ames. The book will make you question everything. Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens is another of those like gorgeous, comforting, beautiful books to read. This one is narrated by the ghost of a teenage girl who is like gay and lusty as hell. She just loves all of the women that she is haunting, essentially. And in this book, she becomes completely obsessed with a real-life figure, George Sand, who was the lover of the musician Chopin, and it's about these few months that they spent at a monastery in Mallorca, while Blanca, our narrator ghost, is just like super horny for George. America Is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo is another book that I absolutely loved. This one is about a young woman called Hiro who moves from the Philippines to America to stay with family there after a traumatic past in the Philippines that we slowly learn about. And it's about the relationships that she forms with her young cousin there, with the community of friends that she makes in this like Filipino community, and also with the woman that she falls in love with there called Rosalind. Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers is a book that I just read really, really recently, and I didn't know there was going to be a lesbian love story in it. I won't say too much about which characters this develops between because it came as a surprise to me, and it's a really great plot to watch play out, but there is a love represented between 2 women in this book. It is not necessarily the most positive portrayal. It is quite anguished. Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield is a very haunting novel about a married couple, 2 women, one of whom went on a deep sea dive for work and came back not the same, potentially not quite human. She doesn't really speak anymore, and she seems to be slowly turning into some kind of water creature. It's almost a horror book, which will make sense if you've read Julia Armfield's previous short stories. Like, that is the genre that she writes in. It's almost horror, not quite horror. It's also this really beautiful and sad, mournful love story for a love that is falling apart because one of the people in the love story is turning into a fish. Love is for Losers by Vibke Brueggemann is a really, really fun YA novel that I absolutely loved. This is the book that I wish I had read when I was growing up. It's got a main character called Phoebe, who is like completely uninterested in love. Her best friend's just got a boyfriend and it is changing everything, and she is fed up of hearing about it. She is a very, very funny main character. I loved being in her head. And it's about this group of friends that she makes volunteering at a charity shop. One of the friends is a girl called Emma, who might end up being more than a friend. Pages for You and Pages for Her, the long-awaited sequel. These books are by Sylvia Brownrigg, and they are about the relationship between two women who, in the first book, meet at university when the younger one, Flannery, is a student, and Anne, who's a few years older, is a graduate professor. They have this passionate romance, but you know right from the beginning of the book that you are going to be watching the rise and fall of this love story. Pages for Her was written years later, and finally we get to reunite these two women. White is for Witching by Helen Oyemi. Classically weird story. That's what Helen Oyemi is best at. It's a sort of haunted house story that's sort of about racism and eating disorders, and there's a lot going on in here, but also one of our main characters goes off to uni and falls in love with a girl. Wilder Girls by Rory Power. Bloody weird book. I really enjoyed this one. There is a plague that has torn through this boarding school on an island. What is left now is these girls who have gone wild and whose bodies have changed in very strange, borderline grotesque ways. They have just been told to wait, quarantined on this island, waiting for a cure that they don't know whether or not it's actually coming. Meanwhile, some of them are shagging each other. Marriage of a Thousand Lies is about a married couple who are both gay. So they're in this marriage of convenience, basically, to appease their very conservative parents, but they each date on the side. It's a relationship that has been working fine for them so far. But Lucky, who is the woman who's the main character that we're following, then reunites with her old past best friend and former lover, who is now preparing for her own arranged wedding of convenience, and suddenly Lucky starts to think, maybe we deserve something better than this. And finally, the last book that I picked up from my shelf is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, a beautiful classic of a book. This is about a girl called Celie who has, to put it mildly, a shit show of a life. It is a very sad and traumatizing book for the first part. I promise you it does get better. We follow her forming connections with other women, particularly the sexy Shug. Through that, she learns a lot about her own sexuality, and the book becomes about all of these different connections between women, and it does become a really joyful book, I promise. Just gotta push on through the really sad bits. It does get there. So there you go, that was a very whistle-stop tour through all of the sapphic books that I just pulled off my shelf. You can see there's a lot of gaps now, because it turns out I really do own a lot of books about being a lesbian. It's going to take me forever to put those all back on my shelves now, so that's where I'm going to start. But do leave me recommendations below if you think there's any massive gaps in my collection that I should have read, or if you've noticed anything that I forgot to pick up off the shelf. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I post new videos every Friday, and I'll see you on the next one.